Sigelere Africa, Manu Pagani Suponolayo, Yiswa imitana zoyetu, Gosi, Sigelera, Tina, Musabolayo, Murena Buluka se Chavasa Yesu, Ufedise Tindwale Maxwell. Sounds the call to come together, and united we shall stand. Let us live and strive for freedom in South Africa, our
Good morning, everyone. Welcome again to our Bidders Conference. My name is Bernard Magoro. I am the head of the IPP office. So I guess the big question in everybody's mind is, how did we come up with this RFP? So I am going to try and just take you through the high-level principles of the RFP and some of its key features. And later on, the team will take you through some of the key aspects and give you more details on those aspects. And then after that, we will then allow you time for Q&A sessions where you can ask any outstanding issues that you may need clarifications on. So in terms of what I need to cover, I'll just give you a brief overview of why we came up with the RFP, the key aspects regarding the design of the RFP itself, what are some of the key features that are specific to this RFP, and lastly, I'll just show you the milestones from here leading to the financial close of the program. So in terms of the background to the RFP itself, we are all aware of the challenges that South Africa is facing in terms of the capacity shortages and the need to bring capacity online as soon as possible. So the IRP itself did recognize the gap of about 2,000 megawatts. Eskom also communicated the gap in the region of 4,000 to 5,000 megawatts that needs to be filled as soon as possible. The Department of Minerals and Energy has taken a number of initiatives to try and assist in closing the gap. But with regard to the risk mitigation, we are looking at procuring 2,000 megawatts of capacity from dispatchable capacity out there from the IPPs. And that is the first pillar of the risk mitigation RFP. The second pillar, as you are aware of the current challenges in the country, the government in all its procurement initiatives has always taken into account the socio-economic challenges that South Africa is facing. So the risk mitigation is no exception. So you will see later on that as part of this RFP, we are also, we've designed it to also support the economic transformation agenda of the country. So just in terms of the design of the RFP itself, there are certain principles that we had to consider in designing the RFP. The first and the key one was around the system requirements. So we had to look exactly at what is required to fill the gap. So if you look at the curve that's on the screen now, you will see that South Africa needs capacity between 5 in the morning and 9 p.m. at night. And this is in line with the times that we have been experiencing load shedding in the recent past. The second principle was around the least cost. Given the need to drive the economy. So the government also wants to try and procure an affordable and low-cost energy to support economic growth. This is one of the critical aspects for us in designing this RFP. The third one is regarding the IRP itself. So whatever we procure through this program has to align back to the IRP 2019. Moving on, in terms of the connection and the grid availability, the key aspects here to note is that we want power that can come online as soon as possible. So any capacity that will require further grid strengthening, unfortunately, will not be considered in the evaluation process. We will need capacity that can be connected without the need for a lot of strengthening on the grid. Another principle that we have to consider, we have to make sure that investor confidence is assured in this program. We've had several engagements with the likes of National Treasury, ESCOM, and other spheres of government to make sure that investor confidence is it's assured as part of the procurement process. So the PPA remains bankable. So the risk allocation methodology has been done to make sure that it's fair on both parties. The economic transformation agenda, we all know about the challenges that we face as a country. So the program also aims to drive economic transformation agenda in the country. Last but not least, the issue of energy decarbonization of the grid is also part of the key principle when designing this RFP. So the technologies that are considered are those that further the need to decarbonize our grid. Now moving on to the key aspects of this RFP. As I mentioned earlier, system requirements were very key. We had to deliver what is required in order to meet the requirements of the system operator. So the curve that you see on the right is the daily demand profile for the whole week in South Africa. So the RFP has been designed to complement that demand profile. So some of the technical aspects, the capacity has to be dispatchable, flexible. It has to be available from 5 a.m. in the morning until 9:30 at night. It has to be able to meet the ancillary services requirements of the system operator. For the first time, we are not only procuring energy in this program, we are also procuring capacity and we are also procuring ancillary services. The minimum load factor, it's about 50%. That is based on the total hours of the year. But if you only look at the 16.5 hours that we're contracting for, that works out to about 72%. So as a result of those requirements, we came up with the technology agnostic solution that the RFP is seeking for. So it's an output-based RFP. We do not care how you come up with a solution as long as you meet the requirements of the system operator. So to try and bring down the cost, it's very clear that given the technical requirements, a fuel-based solution is much easier to meet those requirements. But then we changed the technical aspects to allow a portfolio approach whereby you could bid multiple facilities as one project, you could bid different technologies as one project, so that the blended cost of that solution, it's much cheaper than having one fuel-based technology solution. So that's basically where we are, and there are some aspects that you need to take into account as a bidder. This is particularly around the storage facilities. So there won't be any opportunity to charge your storage facilities using electricity from the grid. Wheeling is not taken into account in this program. Our view is that if you're designing a facility that depends on storage, both the charging and the charging storage facility must be located on one site. And then other aspects of the program, the minimum contracted capacity will be 50 megawatts. The maximum is about 450 megawatts. In order to allow for capacity to come online sooner, there will be early energy payment or incentives for the capacity to be brought online much quicker. So for those who are considering gas engines and gas turbines, just keep in mind that in order to align with other government strategies, your technology must be able to take LNG as part of the dual fuel capability of that technology. The last key point to mention here is that the long stop date will be June 2022. Just a little bit on the financial side, further details later on. For evaluation purposes, 95% of the price will be based on the energy and the 5% will be based on ancillary services. Since this is a dispatchable program, fuel will be a pass-through for the duration of the program. Another key aspect is that the department is planning to do some benchmarking of the prices that we get at the end of the bid evaluation process. So there will be some benchmark brought back into the local context, and those are the prices that will then be considered for the final evaluation. And then we are also allowing bidders to give us at least 2 full and partial indexation scenarios so that we can choose the best scenario for the pricing going forward. Then the other aspect to keep in mind is around economic development. This is nothing new. We've just built on what we have achieved during the RIP program and the coal program, and taking into account the amended BEE codes. So there will be a progressive targets growing from what we have achieved over the years into this new program. So we are still targeting the same aspects, local content, which has a threshold of about 40%. This also includes the designated local content aspects as well, or equipment as well. In terms of ED scorecard, is the same elements that we have always worked with: job creation, local content, ownership, management control, skills development, enterprise and supply development, and most importantly, the socio-economic development of the local communities. Finally, in terms of the key milestones, where to from here? So on the 30th of October, we are closing bid notification period. The 24th of November is the bid submission date. We'll spend about 3 to 4 days from the 24th to the 27th because of the COVID situation, where we embargoed all the bids. So we are not going to be touching all the bids. And then on the 27th and 28th, we'll be opening all the bids. From the 30th of November onwards, the evaluation process starts. By December, January, we're hoping to be announcing the successful or preferred bidders. And we'll give you about 3 to 4 months for financial close. Just to reiterate again, the scheduled COD dates, long stop date will be June 2022. Thank you very much, and I wish you a wonderful conference, and hopefully all your concerns will be addressed today. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Lena Mangondo. I'm Head of Legal at the IPP office. I am going to take you through the legal overview of the RFP for the Risk Mitigation IPP Procurement Program. My presentation will be broken up into 6 parts, as you can see on the screen. I will start with the legal overview. The primary legislation governing the procurement of new generation capacity is the Electricity Regulation Act, read together with the New Gen regulations. Guiding the procurement of new generation capacity is the Integrated Resource Plan, which the department issued in October last year, otherwise known as IRP 2019. This enabling legislation establishes the competency of the department to procure and implement the risk mitigation program and regulates the manner in which this program is undertaken. Aside from the PFMA Treasury regulations and the specific electricity legislation, as I've just pointed out, procurement of new generation capacity is also required to be compliant and must follow the regulatory regime set out in the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, the Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment Act. Additionally, from a licensing perspective, the National Energy Regulator, established in terms of the National Energy Regulator Act, is then required to license projects, or in terms of Section 34 will then license projects procured under these IPP programs. From a local government perspective, one also has to comply with the Municipal Finance Management Act as well as the Municipal Systems Act to the extent relevant and subject to any lawful exemptions from any of these specific pieces of legislation. In line with the provisions of the Competition Act, it is a requirement that bidders must satisfy themselves and undertake a due diligence to ensure that aspects of their projects are not notifiable transactions in terms of the Competition Act. Where there is a need for notification, bidders are required to ensure that they comply with the necessary provisions of the Competition Act. Furthermore, the bidders, including its suppliers, contractors being the construction contractor and the operation and maintenance contractor, as well as lenders, if any, are required to satisfy themselves as to compliance with other statutory and legal requirements in relation to the bidder's project or any aspect of their project. I will now move on to the next slide, which provides an overview of the exemptions or deviations that the department has applied for. One of the pieces of legislation that the department is required to comply with from a procurement perspective is the Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act. Recognizing that the department wanted to set forward-looking commitments on economic development and the manner in which the evaluation is undertaken, the department has approached the Minister of Finance to secure an exemption from the provisions of the Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act for this particular procurement. The department has structured its economic development framework for this procurement on the basis that such exemption will be granted by the Minister of Finance. Furthermore, the department is in the process of obtaining a deviation from the provisions of the Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment Act and has approached the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition to obtain such an exemption. As I indicated earlier, the department has structured and designed the economic development framework and developed a bespoke scorecard on the basis that such exemption will be granted by the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition. I move on to the next topic, which provides an overview of the procurement. As I indicated earlier, in line with the Electricity Regulation Act, the Minister has, with the concurrence of NERSA, issued a determination to ensure security of supply. In line with that determination, approximately 2,000 megawatts is to be procured by the department through a range of different energy technologies. The procurement program targets connection of such new generation capacity as soon as reasonably possible, but by no later than end of June 2022. In line with the determination, the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, as the relevant policy department, is designated as the procurer. Eskom Holdings is the designated buyer under such determination. Bidders or projects that are then selected as preferred bidders under this program will then enter into a power purchase agreement or PPA with Eskom to provide the new generation capacity in compliance with, among others, the performance requirements that have been included as an RFP qualification criteria. Furthermore, such preferred bidders will enter into an implementation agreement or IA with the department. Such IA sets out and commits bidders to the economic development commitments that they would have made as part of the bid. These are then included as contractual obligations under the IA. Furthermore, the IA sets out the government support which the government provides to the buyer and the seller. It also sets out the obligations of the seller in respect of decommissioning and provides a variation process for future conversion of the dispatchable power generation facilities to utilize gas or LNG as a fuel source when available in South Africa. One of the design principles of the risk mitigation IPP program is that we have enabled a portfolio approach to projects where the dispatchable power generation project or projects may utilize fuel to produce the energy output and may be comprised of more than one facility and project site. Such projects will also be required to provide ancillary services. Additionally, under this program, the department will procure from such projects capacity, energy output, and ancillary services from such dispatchable power projects. As I indicated, bid responses in response to this RFP may be in the form of a single dispatchable facility or a portfolio of facilities, which includes dispatchable and non-dispatchable facilities. In this respect, projects may comprise of any of this following: a single facility using a single technology solution on a single project site, multiple facilities using different technology solutions, being fuel and non-fuel based generation on a single project site, or multiple facilities using different technology solutions on multiple project sites, with such facilities being a combination of dispatchable and non-dispatchable facilities. It is important to note that energy output generated by projects procured under this program must constitute new generation capacity as defined in the new gen regs. Bidders who wish to use brownfield sites for the purposes of their projects must ensure that existing equipment and machinery forming part of the generation of electricity on such proposed project sites are completely decommissioned, and that a new facility is established on that project site in order to participate in this procurement process. The evaluation of bid responses is conducted in two distinct phases. The first phase is the qualification stage. Bidders are required to ensure compliance with all Part B functional and qualification criteria. The second phase is the evaluation stage, which focuses specifically on a Part C competitive evaluation. It is important for bidders to note that the functional and qualification criteria set out in Part B of the RFP are set as pass-fail criteria. And in order for a bid to be considered a compliant bid and to be eligible for selection or consideration as a preferred bidder, such bid response must meet or exceed such requirements set out in Part B. In order to meet the functional evaluation and qualification criteria of Part B, bidders are required to submit bid responses in respect of prospective dispatchable power generation projects that can meet the performance requirements under this procurement program. The functional and qualification criteria set out in Part B of the RFP, as well as the volumes to this Part B, consist of the following umbrella categories: legal qualification criteria, which includes land acquisition, land use, and environmental consent criteria, which is Volume 2, Part 1 of the RFP in Part B. The technical qualification criteria, financial qualification criteria. The technical qualification criteria is set out in Volume 3. The financial qualification criteria is set out in Volume 4. The economic development qualification criteria is then set out in Volume 5. Furthermore, bidders are required in Volume 6 of the RFP to complete the tables which then go into the PPA and the IA. In line with Clause 8 of Part B, there's an assessment for value for money. Such value for money assessment is a regulatory requirement. All bid responses are required to ensure value for money to government and the consumer, and may also be required to demonstrate value for money for the buyer. Such requirement, as I indicated, is set out in the new GEM regulations. Once bidders have complied with all qualification criteria set out in Part B, then they can proceed to the second stage, which is then the comparative and competitive evaluation. To the extent that there are more bidders than megawatts available for allocation, then all compliant bidders will go through a comparative evaluation in relation to the evaluation price and economic development in terms of Part C of the RFP. The next part of my presentation provides an overview of the contractual framework. As previously indicated, once a bidder is successful, it will sign a preferred bidder development undertaking, which also includes a project plan in respect of the activities the preferred bidder will undertake for it to get to commercial close. At commercial close, the preferred bidder will enter into a range of project agreements, being the implementation agreement with the department, power purchase agreement with Eskom, the independent engineer agreement for the appointment of an independent engineer with Eskom and the independent engineer, a direct agreement where applicable with the department, Eskom and lenders in respect of the implementation agreement and PPA, connection agreements with either the national transmission company, if grid connection will be at transmission level, the distributor, if the grid connection will be at distribution level, or a self-build agreement with Eskom. In relation to projects that connect at a municipal distribution level, such projects will be required to enter into municipal distribution agreements with the relevant municipality. In line with the rights that lenders require for the connection agreements or step-in rights that they require to be able to step in to the connection agreements, a connection direct agreement will be entered into with lenders, the NTC or Eskom as the case may be, in respect of the transmission or distribution agreement, or if applicable, the self-build agreement. Or separately, where connection is at a municipal distribution level, lenders and the relevant seller will enter into a municipal distribution agreement with the municipal distributor in respect of such municipal distribution agreement. Prior to signature of the above agreements, a bidder will be required to establish a project company, which is a special purpose vehicle, ring-fenced only for purposes of undertaking the bidder's project and subject to the terms and conditions of Part A of the RFP. All shareholders are required to be members of the bidder that designates that project company to be a seller. I have already indicated that each bidder, upon selection as a preferred bidder, will be required to provide the department with the preferred bidder undertaking. In line with the preferred bidder development undertaking, the preferred bidder will be required to provide regular updates to the department on progress in relation to project development activities on their project in the timeline to commercial close. If a bidder fails to comply with any of the provisions or obligations of the preferred bidder development undertaking, the preferred bidder development undertaking may be terminated, and in such instances the preferred bidder may lose its status as a preferred bidder. In such instances, the department will have no further obligations towards that preferred bidder. Turning to the legal qualification criteria set out in Volume 2 of Part B of the RFP, the following are the legal qualification criteria. Bidders will be required to submit an organogram which sets out the structure of their project, including having identified in such project structure members of the bidder, shareholders, lenders, suppliers, including fuel suppliers, and the contractors. Furthermore, in line with the requirements of Volume 2 of the RFP, bidders are required to provide comprehensive responses setting out the legal status of the project company and nominating sponsors in relation to the bidder. In respect of the various agreements and the preferred bidder development undertaking, there should be a confirmation and acceptance of the terms of such documents or agreements by each of the parties to the bid response. As is typical with projects of this nature, the bidder or the project company will be reliant on third-party contractors to enable it to deliver the project and meet its commitments under each of the project agreements. In this respect, to demonstrate the robustness of the project proposal, bidders will be required to provide information in relation to the contracts or commercial arrangements to be entered into with contractors, fuel suppliers, key equipment supply, and where necessary, water supply rights. The IA sets requirements for decommissioning at the end of the project term. In line with this, bidders are required to complete forms included as part of Volume 2 in relation to the decommissioning reserve. Land use is a key criteria to ensure that projects will be capable of being implemented. Bidders will be required to demonstrate compliance with the land acquisition and land use criteria and evaluation. With regards to this particular criteria, it is important to note that in some instances, some of the dispatchable plants may be looking to utilize the same piece of land. In this respect, landowners of such pieces of land may provide confirmations of land use in respect of such piece of land to each prospective bidder, on the understanding that only one preferred bidder may be selected in respect of that particular project site. In the instance where there is more than one compliant bidder in respect of such piece of land, the department may undertake a comparative evaluation amongst such compliant bidders, with one bidder then emerging as the bidder to be appointed or to be awarded the project. And that bidder will then have rights to use such piece of land in line with the land use rights that they would have negotiated with the landowner. Comprehensive requirements have also been included in Volume 2 in the instance where a bidder will be utilizing municipal land. And bidders are required to take specific note of those compliance requirements in respect of utilization of municipal land, including the various supporting documentation that is required to support the land use rights in respect of such municipal land. Bearing in mind that an environmental authorization can make or break a project, Volume 2 also lists the environmental consent criteria that bidders are required to comply with in order for them to be considered a compliant bidder. Projects which submit, or bidders that submit a bid response in response to this RFP can only do so in respect of projects that are located within the Republic of South Africa. Cross-border projects will not be considered in this evaluation. To close off, in Volume 2, Part 2, bidders are required to complete the forms and provide the confirmations set out in this volume, which are listed as the form of bid and returnable schedules, which include the National Treasury standard bidding documents as adapted for this program. It is critical that bidders complete all such forms set out in Volume 2. Thank you for your time. I know that this has been a long presentation. There is an opportunity, once all presentations have been completed, for delegates to pose questions for which, to the extent possible, answers will be provided during this session. We will also then answer any additional questions for which we are not able to answer during the Q&A session at the end, to then respond through the clarification process, and a briefing note will then be issued dealing with such clarification questions. Thank you.
Good day everyone, I'm Pavlin Govender and I'm from the IPP office. I'll be discussing the technical components of the Risk Mitigation Independent Power Producer Program. The outline of the program is as follows. Firstly, we're going to be discussing the objectives of the program. We're going to be discussing technical criteria 1, which is the general requirements, criteria 2, which is the compliance to the PPA requirements, criteria 3, the eligible capacity, criteria 4, which is a feasibility study report, criteria 5, which is the grid connection element, and criteria 6, which is decommissioning cost report. The objective of the program is to procure 2,000 megawatts on a least cost least regret basis of various technologies according to Table 5 of the IRP 2019. Technical criteria 1, general requirements. Section 2.2.1. The facility shall include plant and equipment that has complete and unqualified OEM guarantees. Section 2.2.2. The facility shall be installed on greenfield or previously cleared brownfield sites. Section 2.4. The configuration of the technology that is to be used by the bidder in respect of the power generation equipment shall be based on projects which must conform to the requirements of Clause 5.7. In terms of scenarios of the project configurations, the project could consist of either one site of a dispatchable facility connecting to a point of connection that is metered at that particular point, or scenario 2, which is two facility configurations on two sites with one facility being of a non-dispatchable generation technology being metered at that point in terms of energy, and the second facility, which is a dispatchable generation technology, or including a non-dispatchable facility at the second facility site. Technical qualification criteria 2 entails the compliance to the PPA performance requirements. In terms of the PPA performance requirements, the availability of the project to be able to provide energy capacity and ancillary services must do so between 5 a.m. and 9:30 p.m. at night. The minimum gen value shall be no greater than 25% of the project contracted capacity. Startup and shutdown from cold start shall be under 15 minutes. Time to synchronization shall be under 5 minutes. In terms of ancillary services, for instantaneous reserves, for at least 30% of the contracted capacity, it shall be available in 10 seconds for a maximum of 3,723 hours per annum or 155 events per annum. In terms of regulating reserve, it shall be at most 10% of contracted capacity at a ramp rate of 1.67% of project contracted capacity per minute for a maximum of 3,723 hours per annum. Stable reactive power capability of the facility on the HV side of the step-up transformer shall comply to the South African grid code in terms of lagging and leading power factors. A minimum number of project starts and stops per year shall be 365 starts and stops per year, and a maximum number of starts and stops per year shall be 800 starts and stops per year. Project minimum load factor shall be a minimum of 50% per annum. Technical qualification criteria 3, eligible capacity of section 4. The minimum capacity value for a project shall be 50 megawatts to a maximum of 450 megawatts. Technical qualification criteria 4, feasibility study. Criteria 4.1 in terms of project development plan states that the bidder shall provide Form 6 in terms of project development plan in Appendix 3.A of Volume 3. Criteria 4.2, proven design and technology requirements. The definition of proven technology is according to 5.7 of Volume 3, Part 1, in terms of what's been captured in Form 4 of Appendix 3A, Volume 3, Part 2. Criteria 4.3, design standards and certification. The project specification to be included as part of the construction contract shall comply to all applicable South African standard requirements for projects of this nature. Criteria 4.4, water requirements and supply. The bidder shall provide Form 10, water balance diagram, and Form 11, information in respect of water use license, according to Appendix 3A. Criteria 4.5, fuel supply requirements and logistics and evidence. The information required in this respect for fuel requirements shall be detailed according to Section 5.10, Volume 3, Technical Requirements, Part 1. Criteria 4.6, heat balance diagram and CO2 emissions. The bidder shall provide Form 8, Project Heat Balance Diagram of Appendix 3A. Criteria 4.7, project energy output and loss of energy output due to reduced availability. Bidders shall complete Table A11, project energy output and project loss of energy output due to reduced availability of Appendix 6D. Criteria 4.8, ancillary services, charge rate verification. An independent reviewer must undertake to review and verify the ancillary service charge rate as reflected of the incremental cost of operating and maintenance of the facility and fuel cost presented as part of Form 9, ancillary services charge rate in Appendix 3A. Criteria 4.9, construction contractor qualification. As part of the bid submission, Form 2, organogram of Appendix 3A of Volume 3 needs to be completed. Criteria 4.10, O&M contractor verification. A bidder must propose a project company that will operate and maintain the project itself or propose an O&M contractor to oversee and maintain the project. Criteria 4.11, project schedule. The bidder shall provide a completed Schedule 2, completed milestone and forms of notices. Part 1, completion milestones of the PPA attached to the RFP in Appendix 2A. Criteria 5, grid connection. Section 6.2.1, compliance with codes. The bidder shall provide a signed letter by the bidder, the construction contractor, or the key electrical contractor for the project. The letter shall state that the project will be able to comply with all applicable codes prior to schedule COD. Section 6.2.2, time and cost for grid connection. The bidder will provide a statement that clarifies which parts of the grid connection works will be implemented by the bidder. Section 6.2.3, cost estimate letter from the relevant network service provider. The bidder shall provide a valid cost estimate letter from the relevant network service provider and including the scope and any appendices for the indicative cost and indicative timeline for the grid connection. Technical qualification 6, decommissioning cost report. Section 7, decommissioning cost report. The bidder shall submit a written report, decommissioning cost report, that details the cost estimates for the decommissioning of the project and the rehabilitation of the project site on termination of the PPA. Bidders' questions and answers. Now that we're done with the technical criteria as specified in the RFP, I'm going to talk through some of the bidders' questions that have been sent to date, as well as responses to those questions. Question number 1 revolves around the facility reliability run to be able to operate the plant continuously for 72 hours at full load. Yet, the requirement for the program requires a 16.5-hour operation over any given day. Question number 2 revolves around the project reliability run for 30 consecutive days, which entails a full load operation as well as a 24-hour operation at full load. Question number 3 revolves around how would the operation of the reliability run be conducted. In terms of a response to that question, the reliability testing criteria of clause 5.3 in Schedule 8 of the PPA will be updated accordingly. The facility reliability run shall be carried out for each facility at its contracted capacity for 15 consecutive days at full load over the dispatchable period. The project reliability run will be removed from the criteria. Query number 2 entails questions around battery storage and charging from the grid to be able to store energy on the battery. In terms of the response to that question, bidders proposing battery storage for dispatchable facilities must comply to clause 5.7.12 of volume 3 part 1. The supply of electrical energy to the seller by the buyer or from the system is prohibited for the purposes of storing energy at an electrical storage facility. Query number 3. In the case of dispatchable projects consisting of battery storage and renewable energy facilities not co-located, would it be possible for the battery storage to absorb input energy from the system while the renewable energy facility exports energy via wheeling agreements? The response to that question is as follows. The proposed solution will ultimately require energy to be absorbed from the system according to clause 5.7.12, which is prohibited. The wheeling contract agreement is an external contract that is not within the ambit of this program. Please refer to the definition of a facility if the storage system and the renewable facility are not feeding power at the same connection point. Therefore, the facility is not a dispatchable facility. This concludes the presentation on the technical aspects of the Risk Mitigation Independent Power Producer Program, Volume 3, and associated technical aspects. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed the conference.
Good day, my name is Nontlantla Mia. I work for Grid Access Unit. Our role is to facilitate the connection of IPPs into the Eskom grid and also manage the relationship between the IPPs and Eskom. I have been requested to present the Eskom grid integration process for IPPs. And I've used a presentation that we've presented numerous times in the past. It's even published in one of the leading engineering magazines, Energize. And the process has been presented in various forms, but today I'm presenting one that was initially presented by Ryan Smith. So this process that I'm covering today highlights Eskom responsibilities, IPP responsibilities, and also tries to ensure where the integration points are if the IPP is participating in the regulated program, being the DMRE IPP procurement process. Okay, so the process will start obviously with the IPP having done the feasibility studies to determine where they would like the generation facility to be based on the resources and whatever else is required. When the IPP is ready, they can go to the Grid Access Unit website to obtain an application form for grid integration of the facility into the Eskom grid. This does not cater for the municipalities. If you require integration into the municipalities, we'll have to approach the relevant municipality. So the application form must be submitted then to Grid Access Unit. The application form itself has contact details of the IPP execs in all the provinces. So where you want your facility to be, you must submit the application form to that relevant IPP exec. The IPP execs will check the completeness of the application form and then invoice the customer for the co-assessment fee. Once the co-assessment fee has been paid, then the clock starts for our time to issue the co-assessment letter. In the application form, we do indicate that we'll require 90 days to issue the co-assessment letter if the connection works required for connecting the IPP to the Eskom grid only is on the distribution network only. But if some upgrade of the transmission network is required, we require at least 120 days. That's what we've put in the application form. However, must highlight that we find that technical solutions that are required in order for us to integrate, to enable the integration of the IPP facilities into the Eskom grid. They're becoming more complex, and we find we need to be more innovative, and therefore it becomes more and more necessary to consult wider in the Eskom business, and therefore this 90 to 120 days is becoming unattainable, be that as it may. Once the co-assessment fee has been paid, the engineers will then start compiling a engineering proposal, and that really is meant to be a very simple desktop exercise, high-level design, indicating if there's capacity, if you require a feeder bay there, a transformer there, really nothing complicated. Once that is done, we'll then compile a co-assessment letter that will be vetted within Eskom just to make sure that the Eskom commercial processes have been applied. Once that is done, then we'll issue the co-assessment letter to the IPP. If the IPP is participating in the regulated program, then they will then submit those co-assessment letters together with other documents for DMRE IPP evaluation for preferred bidders. If the IPP is not participating in the DMRE program or regulated program, then IPP may request then a budget quote. At the stage of requesting the budget quote, the IPP has an option to choose whether they want an Eskom build or a self-build. Eskom build means that Eskom will do designs, will cost, will quote to the customer the cost, and also indicate the time it will take for us to execute the project. If a customer chooses self-built, The customer has control over the time to execute the project and the cost. However, the IPP will need to align with the ESCOM standards with respect to the designs. Also of note is that the IPP also has an option at application stage to indicate whether they would like a self-built option or an ESCOM built option to construct the assets, the connection assets. Right, so once the customer requests the budget quote and pay the quotation fee, then the process of issuing a budget quote starts. And that will start with the presentation to the investment committees for concept release approval. Once that's done, if the IPP is undertaking the self-built, then the IPP will compile the preliminary design and cost, and that will need to be presented at the various technical committees. Same if ESCOM built has been selected, ESCOM will need to compile the preliminary design and provide costs, and that will have to be approved again at investment committees. Once that's done, then we'll compile a budget code to issue to IPPs. When we issue the budget code to IPPs, it will come with a connection and user system agreement, reasonably completed. Only the essential sections will be completed, but it's standard, it's a standard document. And also, where applicable, a self-built agreement will be issued. Then, if if the IPP is participating in the regulated program, then they can submit the budget code to the IPP office for financial close. Once that is done, the preferred bidders will sign PPAs with the single bar office and also then execute the budget code, meaning you accept the budget code. The budget code becomes an agreement. You also sign the connection and use of system agreement and the self-built agreement. And then once all the budget code conditions have been met, then the detailed design, then the IPP will undertake a detailed design if they had selected a self-built. And if it was an ESCOM built, ESCOM will also undertake the detailed design. Again, if it's a self-built, ESCOM will need to accept the designs that have been undertaken by the IPP. Again, I need to point out that the consultants that must be appointed to do the designs must be ESCOM approved. The material, the suppliers that will supply the equipment must be ESCOM approved. But that it can be provided to customers on request at various stages of the process. So once the detailed design has been compiled, again, there's presentation to the investment committees to approve execution or ERA. Once that's done, then construction will start. IPPs will construct. The contract works is being done under self-built, and ESCOM will then undertake or will construct ESCOM works. Also, if there is self-built, ESCOM will appoint a clerk of works who will monitor quality of execution and that the materials meet the ESCOM standards, procedures that are followed. Once that's done, then Eskom will test and commission both the Eskom works and the contract works. Following that, then the IPP will undertake grid compliance testing together with RETEC. And then the project can be closed out. Once it's done, a final release approval is presented to investment committees for project closeout. And that's it. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Good day everyone that has joined our virtual bidder conference. My name is Elsa Stradom and I will today be taking you through the financial evaluation criteria as it is contained within the RFP Volume 4, Part A and B, and I will also spend some time on explaining the tariff component structure and the payment mechanism as per Schedule 9 of the PPA. The financial evaluation, the criteria, there's 3 criteria that has to be met and bidders has to pass all 3 criteria in order to pass and move on to the next stage of the comparative evaluation. The criteria is that of the evaluation price, the financial standing and the robustness of the proposal, as well as the robustness of the financial model. It is important to note that this is a price competition, and although there is no qualification price cap, the evaluation price is what will be important in selecting the preferred bidders. With regard to the financial standing and the robustness of the funding proposal, here we require letters of commitment and support from the lenders, the providers of debt and equity, as well as the sponsors and the bidders. It has been brought to our attention that the level of commitment that is required is extensive, taking into account a short time period to bid submission, and we are currently considering in ways in which we could relax some of those requirements but still maintain the integrity of the commitment that we seek. If necessary, we will issue a briefing note in this regard. With regard to the financial model must set out all costs and rates very clearly, both for the construction and the operational period, and the financial model needs to be accompanied by Appendix 4F as well as the auditor's letter. To this effect, we have also issued a second briefing note, or briefing note number 2, with an updated Appendix 4F for bidders to take note of. I would like to highlight some key aspects that is important for bidders to take note of as part of the evaluation price and the financial evaluation. A bidder is required to include the grid connection cost as part of the evaluation price. They are required to provide for carbon tax as per the provisions of the Carbon Tax Act, the relevant provisions applicable to the technology that they are proposing. All non-fuel based charge rates needs to be indexed at CPI over the term of the PPA, and the fuel charge rate needs to be adjusted on a monthly basis based on the indexes that are selected and that will be provided as part of Appendix 4G. The evaluation price has to include the ancillary services costs, and the evaluation price needs to be calculated at a load factor of 70% and 100%. The evaluation price is a weighted evaluation price, and it's weighted between the energy tariff or energy output component and the ancillary services component, with 95% of the weight towards the energy output and 5% towards the ancillary output. The electricity tariff component is the average of the net present value of component A to D, as well as your startups and your carbon tax payments, at 100% load factor and 70% load factor. The evaluation price must further demonstrate value for money to the buyer as well as to government, and to this extent we will be undertaking a benchmarking exercise. The elements of the costs and rates of a bidder that will be subject to the benchmarking exercise is set out in Volume 4, Part 1, and it basically, the key elements include the key equipment. It includes the major construction cost items, operating expense items, fuel, as well as IRRs, success fees, and so on. The purpose of the benchmarking exercise is to ensure that the outcome of the evaluation can be seen to provide value for money to both the bidder and to government, and is comparable to what is available for this type of output specifications on a global scale. Based on the outcome of the benchmarking, the department may request the bidder to undertake a best and final offer exercise or a BAFO, but the bidder will be under no obligation to revise their bid responses, and should they choose not to submit a BAFO, then the original results will stand in relation to that bidder. The BAFO will be evaluated afresh in accordance with the relevant evaluation criteria as may be determined by the department. I think at this point in time I need to stress or emphasize that the BAFO is at the discretion of the department. The next aspect that I would like to cover is to explain a little bit about how the tariff will be structured, what the different tariff structure components are. Component A refers to the net dependable capacity for a dispatchable plant and the achieved capacity for a non-dispatchable plant, and it basically recovers the capital cost, that's your taxes, debt services, equity returns for both those plants. The seller may recover 100% of the capital cost associated with the dispatchable plant as part of component A, but only 50% of the capital costs associated with the non-dispatchable plant. Component A will be subject to deductions for non-availability, and it's important to note that any capital requirements associated with providing the ancillary services needs to be included in component A. Component B refers to the fixed operating and maintenance costs associated with both the dispatchable and the non-dispatchable plant. Again, the seller is allowed to recover 100% of those costs associated with the dispatchable plant, but only 50% of the cost associated with the non-dispatchable plant as part of component B. It will also be subject to deductions for non-availability, and it needs to also include the cost associated with providing the mandatory ancillary services. The rationale for allowing only 50% of component A and component B for the non-dispatchable plant to be recovered as part of the capacity charge is in order to compensate for availability and capacity, but yet to incentivize energy output and in that way contribute to a lower cost of electricity through a lower blended tariff. Component C and D is the variable cost elements, whereas component A and B deals with capacity and availability and is not necessarily subject to dispatch instructions. Component C and D relates to the energy output and is indeed subject to dispatch instructions. Component C relates to the fuel charge rate. It needs to be indexed monthly based on the applicable or underlying fuel price. And component D relates to the variable O&M cost, and here again the seller may recover 50% of that capital and fixed O&M that was not recovered as part of component A and B for the non-dispatchable plant, and this is then called the renewable recovery charge rate. Component E represents the ancillary services payments, and it recovers the cost associated with providing the ancillary services in line with Schedule 14 of the PPA, and is also subject to penalties for failure to provide those ancillary services, or for in the instance that the performance is not in terms of the standards required. Just again to talk to the fuel as part of component C, the fuel cost will be reimbursed on the basis of a fuel charge rate, adjusted for factors such as the net heat rate, the load factor, ambient conditions and energy output of the dispatchable facility. It needs to be included at the base date of April 2020 in Table A1 of Appendix A, and it thereafter needs to be adjusted on a monthly basis using the formula that is set out for that particular type of fuel that will be used. Appendix 4G, which we will issue to closer to the end of October, will include the fuel forecasts. Currently it includes forecasts for LPG gas, for diesel, for heavy fuel oils, as well as for LNG. If there's any other additional fuel type that is required, the bidders are requested to please advise the department as soon as possible. That basically deals with the RFP, Volume 4, Part A and B of the RFP. The next section of the presentation, I'd like to cover some of the important aspects of the payment mechanism as is set out in Schedule 9 of the PPA. I think before I start with the payment mechanism, I need to also be very clear that the payment mechanism refers to energy generated during the dispatchable period. The payment mechanism provides for a payment during the provisional period, that is prior to COD, to encourage early energy, and that payment in a billing period will consist of fixed operational and maintenance costs. That's component B, as I've previously explained, less the deductions for unavailability. It will include commercial energy rates as well as variable O&M, which is component C and D. And it will include the total startup costs, any cost in excess of one startup per day, because the cost for one startup per day needs to be included as part of component B, and it will include the carbon tax payable. It is important to note that as far as provisional period payments are concerned, there will be no payment in respect of component A, ancillary services or deemed energy. Component A is recovered over the term of the PPA. And therefore there's no requirement for compensation in this regard. We want to reiterate that the seller will be compensated for providing capacity, energy and ancillary services as it is required by the nature of the dispatchable system requirements as set out in the RFP and the PPA. Once COD is achieved, the total payment in a billing period will be made up of your component A and B elements, as previously explained, both for the dispatchable and the non-dispatchable plant. It will be made up of your commercial energy payment, that's the fuel component, and your variable O&M, component C and D, as well as the renewable charge rate for the non-dispatchable plant. It will also include the startups, all startups in excess of one per day, which will be included in component B. It will include the ancillary services payment, carbon tax payable, as well as any deemed energy if applicable. That will be for each billing period. On an annual basis, there will be a compensation for failure to comply with bidders' minimum dispatch obligations. In the event of a late system connection event, the seller will be entitled to receive capacity payments based on the most recent declared capacity and available capacity, and that formula is set out in Schedule 9, and it is also, if necessary, there will be payments in line with Appendix D, the minimum load commitment payments. In the event of system unavailabilities that endure longer than your allowed grid unavailability period, the seller shall also be entitled to receive deemed energy for the non-dispatchable facility. That will be based on the deemed energy as well as the renewable recovery charge rate. The total ancillary service payments in a billing period is the sum of the instantaneous reserve payments and the regulatory reserve payments. This consists basically of the variable cost associated with providing the ancillary service, and it's also subject to penalties for no delivery. If the instantaneous reserve as well as the regulating reserve performance in a billing period is less than the acceptable performance rate, then the seller shall also not be entitled to, and the buyer shall not pay for those instantaneous and regulating reserve. There will be penalties imposed on the dispatchable facility if it's decertified through either its ancillary services certificate being withdrawn or if the certificate is outstanding. The minimum load commitment payments, this is an annual payment that will compensate the seller for its take or pay obligations towards its fuel supplier, as well as the potential energy production by the non-dispatchable plant or facility in the event of a failure by the buyer to comply with its obligation for minimum load commitment. Any compensation made by the buyer to the seller will be paid at the end of the contract year, and it will be calculated as set out in Appendix D of Schedule 9. That brings me to the end of the session on the financial evaluation criteria, as well as the payment mechanism and tariff structure. We have received quite a few questions through the bidder clarification questions up to now. We will be addressing those in more detail as part of briefing notes, and we will also be responding to any further questions that might come as a result of this bidder conference. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dion Fourie. I'm the Acting Head of Economics at the IPP office, and I'll be presenting to you today on the Economic Development Qualification and Evaluation Criteria for the Risk Mitigation Independent Power Producers Procurement Program. I'll provide a brief introduction and some context, after which we'll have a look at the Economic Development module and the related appendices, following which we'll quickly glance over the Economic Development Qualification and Evaluation Criteria. And lastly, I'll talk about each of the economic development criteria in a bit more detail in the context of completing the appendices. The economic development criteria for the Risk Mitigation Independent Power Producers Procurement Program has been based on the bespoke scorecard and achievements of REIPP Bid Window 4, Coal Bid Window 1, and improving the alignment thereof to the amended Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment Codes of Good Practice. In designing the economic development criteria, South Africa's existing economic development policy and legislation was taken into account, and the Economic Development Scorecard of the Risk Mitigation Program is deemed socially and economic developmentally progressive in order to address South Africa's developmental imperatives. Volume 5 is comprised of 4 parts, the first being Volume 5 Economic Development Requirements. All of the parts to Volume 5 should be read in sequence. The Economic Development Requirements provides important information to bidders regarding each and every economic development element, as well as how to complete the appendices, as well as some additional information to provide further context to each economic development element and all the economic development criteria. This is followed by Volume 5, Part 1, Economic Development Qualification Criteria. After that, Volume 5, Part 2, which pertains to the Economic Development Evaluation Criteria, provides further guidance in respect of each economic development element, sub-element, all the information required, and how to complete the appendices. Volume 5, Part 3, Proof of Compliance, provides detail on the information required from bidders to substantiate their economic development commitments. Volume 5 is also complemented by 7 appendices. These appendices are applicable in respect of each facility constituting a project, as well, by nature, by aggregating up to the project level. That means that each of the respective facilities constituting a project should comply with the minimum thresholds and economic development criteria, as well as at the level of the project. Specifically, Appendix 5A, which is the Economic Development Scorecard, is complemented by Appendix 5A1 in respect of designated local content. Appendix 5B is the Economic Development Information Sheet. This is the primary input sheet that should be completed by bidders in respect of the project and in respect of each of the facilities constituting the project, if any. From the information provided by bidders in Appendix 5B and Appendix 5B Facility N, the bidders' commitments in Appendix 5C, which is the Economic Development Qualification Scorecard, and Appendix 5D, which is the Economic Development Evaluation Sheet, will be automatically populated. Appendix 5E requires bidders to provide an indication of the local content components and exchange rates breakdown. Under Appendix 5E is Appendix 5E1, which specifically pertains to designated local content. Appendix 5F pertains to skills development and provides the learning program matrix as stipulated in the amended BEE Codes of Good Practice. Finally, Appendix 5G provides a declaration certificate for local production and content, which should be completed by bidders to substantiate their claims and commitments made in respect of local content. It's important to note that each of the appendices completed in respect of each facility constituting a project, if any, should aggregate up into the information submitted at the project level. We will now have a brief look at the Economic Development Qualification and Evaluation methodology. The Economic Development Criteria comprises of 3 economic development criterions. The qualification criteria must be passed before bidders will be able to progress to the next phase of the evaluation, namely the competitive and comparative evaluation stage. The first economic development criterion is in respect of South African entity participation, which requires a minimum of 49%. The second economic development qualification criterion requires a broad-based black economic empowerment contributor status level of 4 at a minimum. The third economic development qualification criterion is bidders' compliance in respect of the minimum thresholds set for various economic development elements and their comprising sub-elements. Specifically, 6 economic development elements, of which 19 economic development sub-elements have minimum thresholds. These economic development sub-elements are categorized under job creation, local content, ownership, management control, enterprise and supplier development, and socio-economic development. For the economic development evaluation methodology, economic development for the risk mitigation program will be scored out of a total of 10 points. The remainder of 90 points will be accorded to price in alignment with the 90-10 principles espoused in the Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act. As for the 10% that is accorded to economic development, this is the competitive and comparative evaluation for the respective economic development commitments made by bidders. These economic development commitments are made in respect of 7 economic development elements, which comprise 25 economic development sub-elements. The economic development elements are the same as mentioned in the previous slide, but with the addition of skills development. We will now have a bit of a more detailed look at the economic development evaluation criteria in relation to the various appendices and how they should be completed. What this slide indicates is Appendix 5A, the Economic Development Scorecard. Bidders should note that the Economic Development Scorecard, measurement criteria and thresholds are applicable to each facility constituting the project, as well as by nature at the project level. We will have a look at each of these elements in a bit more detail in upcoming slides. Bidders should note that the appendices include 3 input sheets that should be completed by bidders. The first, as mentioned previously, is Appendix 5B and 5B Facility N, or the Economic Development Information Sheet. The next input sheet is Appendix 5E, which requires the local content components and exchange rates breakdown. Part of Appendix 5E is Appendix 5E1 in respect of designated local content. Clear instructions are provided to bidders on how to complete the appendices in the appendices themselves, as well as in Volume 5 Economic Development Requirements and Volume 5 Part 2 Economic Development Evaluation Criteria. Again, bidders must ensure that the information supplied in respect of all the input sheets pertaining to the facilities aggregate up to the project level and that the amounts correspond. The intention of this slide is just to provide an indication how Appendix 5 and Appendix 5B and 5B Facility N look. Appendix 5, the Economic Development Instruction Sheet, provides high-level instructions to bidders on how to complete the appendices, while Appendix 5B and 5B Facility N, which is the Economic Development Information Sheet, is the primary input sheet that should be completed by bidders, in which they should specify their various commitments in accordance with all the economic development elements and related sub-elements at the facility level and for the project. As mentioned, from the information inputted in Appendix 5B and 5B Facility N, Appendix 5C and 5C Facility N, which is the Economic Development Qualification Scorecard, will be automatically populated. Similarly, Appendix 5D and Appendix 5D Facility N, the Economic Development Evaluation Sheet, will also be automatically populated. The Economic Development Qualification Scorecard will flag to bidders in a red no or green yes whether or not the commitments made by bidders in Appendix 5B meet or exceed the minimum qualification thresholds. Appendix 5D and 5D Facility N will automatically calculate the commitments made by bidders in Appendix 5B by using the measurement criteria provided for each and every economic development sub-element. Similarly, it will flag in a red shade if bidders' commitments do not meet or exceed the minimum qualification thresholds. Bidders should attempt to maximize their commitments in order to improve their chances of securing a winning bid. Moving to the first economic development element of job creation, the economic development element of job creation specifically comprises of the economic development sub-elements of the employment for RSA-based employees who are citizens, black people, people from local communities, youth, women, people with disabilities. And it also requires bidders to provide an indication of the number of people employed per megawatt of contracted capacity as a means to incentivize labor intensivity given South Africa's unemployment crisis. The second economic development element of local content is applicable during the construction measurement period with a minimum threshold of 40%, during the operations measurement period, and also includes designated local content. Local content involves expenditure in relation to South African products, excluding the excluded amounts as stipulated in the IA, which do not directly contribute to the development of South Africa's manufacturing sector. Bidders should note that designated local content is included under the 40% local content threshold as a percentage of total project value. The designated local content is as communicated and published via National Treasury's designated sectors circulars. Through the Department's engagements with the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, as well as with the market, the Department is confident that the 40% local content threshold applicable during the construction measurement period as a percentage of total project value can be met for all eligible technologies. This is especially so in view of the technical criteria pertaining to the risk mitigation program. Bidders should further note that the local content thresholds are applicable at the facility level. This means that any combination of technologies located on the same facility site could help one another to meet the minimum 40% local content threshold. What this slide indicates is Appendix 5E and 5E Facility N, which is also an input sheet that should be completed by bidders in respect of the local content components and exchange rates breakdown. Bidders should complete the sheet as it also enables the Department to take account of currency fluctuations between bid submission date and commercial close. Before completing Appendix 5E, bidders should ideally first complete Appendix 5E1 in respect of designated local content, because it is from that information that the first cells in Appendix 5E will be automatically calculated in respect of the designated local content. After that, bidders are required to complete Appendix 5E manually by completing the inputs in the provided yellow cells. Specifically, bidders should indicate the relevant exchange rates and amounts by specifying the list of key components and/or equipment of the generation facility, as well as the list of balance on plant components as categorized under mechanical, civils, electrical assembly and wiring, buildings, engineering and startup costs, software miscellaneous costs, and other costs which cannot be accommodated for in the provided categories. In respect of designated local content, 14 local content components and 177 related subcomponents have been designated by the DTIC as published in National Treasury's designated sectors circulars. As with the general local content threshold of 40% of total project value, the designated local content thresholds are also applicable during the construction measurement period to the facilities that actually do utilize those designated local content components. This means that if any particular facility does not utilize components that have been designated by the DTIC, then they do not have to comply with the thresholds of those specific components. If the value of the designated local content does not exceed the 40% local content threshold, then bidders are required to make up the remainder of expenditure through other spending areas. If a threshold cannot be met by any particular facility, then bidders are required to apply for an exemption from the DTIC at least 1 month before bid submission date. The Department has an expedited process in place with the DTIC in order for the DTIC to fast-track any exemption requests timeously. Should a bidder receive an exemption from a particular designated component or components, such an exemption will apply to all bidders and will be communicated by the Department by way of a briefing note to all bidders. The third economic development element of ownership specifically refers to equity ownership in the hands of South African citizens, black people, and people from local communities in the project company, as well as equity by black people in both the construction contractor and operations contractor. The requirement for ownership in the material contractors is to promote more active participation by black people. Bidders should also note that black private equity funds are eligible to participate in the Risk Mitigation Independent Power Producers Program, but only 5 years after a project has reached COD, to further encourage active participation by black people. Bidders are also encouraged to include the participation of black women in their ownership structures. Bidders are required to repeat ownership inputs applicable to the project company, namely shareholding by South African citizens, black people, and people from local communities in the seller, in the relevant input sheets pertaining to the respective facilities, namely Appendix 5B, Facility N, the Economic Development Information Sheet. This is required in order for the bidder's commitments in respect of ownership to reflect correctly at the level of the project in Appendix 5C and 5D. The economic development element of management control specifically pertains to black top management, which includes black people in top management positions such as the board of directors, executive management, top management, and senior management, to further encourage and incentivize active participation by black people in both the seller and material contractors. Bidders should note that the measurement criteria for the black top management economic development element is applied through the adjusted recognition for gender formula, which incentivizes the participation of black women in the top management structures of sellers and material contractors. In addition to the information related to the material contractors, bidders are required to complete Appendix 5B Facility N by apportioning the person months in respect of the seller for each facility based on the total project value of that facility. This is required for the management control inputs to be accurately reflected at the level of the project. Moving on to the skills development, economic development element, bidders should note that skills development contributions should be made to members of the economically active population, which are people between the age of 15 and 64 years who are either employed or unemployed and actively seeking employment. All skills development contributions should be made in accordance with the learning program matrix as stipulated in the amended broad-based Black Economic Empowerment Codes of Good Practice. The learning program matrix has also been provided to bidders in Appendix 5F. Bidders should note that skills development contributions are adjusted based for spending within local communities receiving 135% recognition in the province or provinces where the facility or facilities respectively are located receiving a normal 100% recognition, or if those commitments are made anywhere else in South Africa receiving only an 80% recognition. This is required for bidders to contribute to skills development in local communities where the developmental imperatives of the country are the greatest. Moving on to the enterprise and supplier development, economic development element. This element comprises of three main sub-elements, namely preferential procurement, supplier development, and enterprise development. Preferential procurement is applicable in the undertaking of all project activities by the project company, its material contractors, and their vendors. Preferential procurement includes broad-based Black Economic Empowerment procurement, Black Enterprise procurement, BBBEE procurement spend on qualifying small enterprises and emerging micro-enterprises, as well as on women-owned vendors. Supplier development involves monetary and non-monetary contributions to entities in the supply chain of project companies, their material contractors, and their vendors. Supplier development is applicable in both the construction measurement period and the operations measurement period. Enterprise development, on the other hand, involves commitments by bidders towards the development of enterprises that are outside of the supply chain of the project company and its material contractors. Similar to skills development, enterprise development contributions are also adjusted for spending within local communities. The last economic development element is the element of socio-economic development. Socio-economic development is intended to contribute to the advancement of local communities through spending on initiatives such as education, healthcare, social welfare, infrastructure, and the general reconstruction of underdeveloped communities. Similar to skills development and enterprise development, socio-economic development is also adjusted for spending within local communities, receiving 135% recognition, within the province or provinces where the facility or facilities are respectively located, receiving 100% recognition, or anywhere else in South Africa, receiving only an 80% recognition of the commitments made. This is to incentivize spending within our local communities. Skills development, enterprise development, and socio-economic development contributions are permitted prior or during the construction measurement period, which will be recognized during the operations measurement period of projects after they have entered COD. If a project is comprised of more than one facility, bidders should apportion their skills development, enterprise development, and socio-economic development spend based on the projected revenue of those facilities. Furthermore, after reaching financial close, bidders are encouraged to collaborate in their skills development, enterprise development, and socio-economic development initiatives in order to maximize the developmental impact of such spend. This brings me to the end of my presentation, and together we can really power South Africa's economic development prospects forward. Now, more than ever, all stakeholders need to pull together to contribute to South Africa's economic progress. The risk mitigation program has been designed to achieve just that. I thank you.
Good day everyone, I'm Louis Moyes. I am the Acting Head of Contract Management in the Independent Power Producers Procurement Office, and I will be presenting on the implementation agreement for the Risk Mitigation Independent Power Producers Procurement Program. A quick outline of the presentation. We'll deal with the purpose and the background of the implementation agreement. We'll deal with the term and the development fee. We will deal with government support. We'll deal with termination for seller default, variation for natural gas and liquefied natural gas, changes in control and black equity, rehabilitation trust, Schedule 2, the notable inclusions in Schedule 2, and the economic development performance penalty regime. First of all, the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy is responsible for security of supply of electricity, and they are the designated procurer under the Section 34 determinations made by the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy. The purpose of the implementation agreement is to record the contractual relationship between the department and the preferred bidder when they are announced, and they will later become the seller. The Minister also issues the guarantees in terms of the PFMA with the concurrence of the Minister of Finance. The IA also records the ED obligations which the bidder has been selected on as part of the preferred bidder process. The term of the IA is effective from the signature date and continues until the termination of the PPA in terms of the provisions thereof, which is a term of 20 years. The development fee for the RMIPPP is 2% of the project cost as defined in the IA. Government support continues to be applicable for the risk mitigation program. The department will stand behind the payments that are due and payable under the PPA for the event that Eskom is unable to make such payments. Termination for seller default. So the department shall be entitled to terminate this agreement for 5 reasons. For failure by the seller to comply with its obligations under Clause 2, in other words, if the development fee is not paid in terms of the provisions of Clause 2. If the seller fails to comply with any of its obligations under 14.3.2 and or 14.9, General Seller Undertakings, and or Clause 18, Rehabilitation Trust. We will come back to Rehabilitation Trust shortly. The third instance of seller default will be if any of the warranties in Clause 25.1, seller warranties, fails at any time during the existence of this agreement to be true and correct in all material respects, and the seller fails to remedy or cure or correct that untruth or incorrectness within a period of 120 days of such warranty, failing to be true and correct in all material respects. It's therefore of utmost importance that sellers comply with the warranties and keep them in place for the term of the PPA and the IA. The fourth instance is that if the seller fails to issue a commence and continue construction confirmation form to the buyer in accordance with the terms of 361 of the PPA within 30 days of the effective date of this agreement. The last instance of default is where a seller, in accordance with the provisions of Clause 11.2 of this agreement, where the reconciliation of the economic development performance penalties, the reconciliation thereof amounts to a positive amount equal or greater than 50% of the P construction measurement period or P operating measurement period, as the case may be in the formula referred to in paragraph 6.1 of Schedule 2. A new inclusion in the implementation agreement is provision for a variation for natural gas or liquefied natural gas. In terms of this clause, the seller may approach the department and make a proposal to switch from liquefied petroleum gas to liquefied natural gas or natural gas. The department will then consider such after consultation with other stakeholders, and if accepted by the department, it will be implemented. If not, the seller will continue on the basis on which the contract was entered into. The converse is also true that the department may approach the seller on natural gas or liquefied natural gas becoming available and can be used as an alternative fuel. Changes in control and black equity. All changes in control must still be approved by the department, and there are no changes in that policy. Any changes in shareholding within a period of 3 years of the effective date of the IA also requires the consent of the department. Any changes that affects black equity or equity held by black people requires the approval of the department, as that may have an adverse effect to the commitments contained in Schedule 2. A new provision has also been made where certain recognized acquirers are included in the implementation agreement, but such changes may only be effected 5 years after the commercial operation date. Those recognized acquirers are black enterprises, a private equity fund whose structure and ownership meets the relevant criteria for a treatment as ownership by black people in terms of the BBBEE codes, a pension fund that is established for the benefit of government employees or employees of state-owned entities and other statutory bodies, a fund that is established or exists in terms of legislation for general public benefit, and any other entity or category of entities designated as recognized acquirers in writing by the department. A rehabilitation trust must be established at the time of entering into the agreements, or a rehabilitation bank guarantee must be issued. It is very important to note that that rehabilitation trust or guarantee must be in place at all times during the tenure of the PPA, and must also be funded sufficiently to carry out all the activities that are required for decommissioning of the plant. Schedule 2 is a recordal of economic development proposals submitted by the bidders during the bid evaluation, and is the basis on which the preferred bidders were selected, together with the score for price. Monitoring and compliance in the risk mitigation program will be done at project level, and the commitment will be recorded based on the proposal pursuant to Part B, Volume 5 of the RFP. Notable inclusions in the Schedule 2 of the implementation agreement: there is stringent and improved reporting requirement regime that has been implemented to monitor compliance more effectively. There is also provision for the accumulation of enterprise development contributions as well as socio-economic development contributions. There is a recognition for enterprise development contributions, socio-economic development contributions, and skills development contributions during the construction measurement period, and that will be acknowledged as spent during the operations measurement period. There is also a recognition of administration cost. 10% of the contributions or obligations of the seller for enterprise development, socio-economic development, and skills development obligations will be allowed to be deducted by the seller for employing suitably qualified people to perform the initiatives planned by the sellers. Recognizing that the department also has to perform contract management mandate as received from the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, 5% of those contributions will be paid to the department. And then the department may, from time to time, issue economic development monitoring notes to provide clarity. The regime for economic development performance penalties has moved from the termination point regime to a pure monetary penalty that will be imposed. The monetary penalty is based on calculation in accordance with the formulas at the end of the construction measurement period and thereafter at the end of each contract year of the operations measurement period. Time bars have been introduced for the referral of a dispute on the penalties, and it is now set at within 10 business days after notice was received by the seller. All termination thresholds are now set at 80% and translating into calculation of penalties. Failure to make payment or penalties will result in termination. Thank you very much.